The only way Germany could have won? Let's see about that. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm definitely not one of those people that believe that Germany could not have ever won World War II. I think that's a crazy thought. Something absolutely insane had to have happened, but I think it was still maybe plausible.
August 1945.
So this is already at the end.
The Soviet Union is occupied up to the AA line. Spain, Portugal, and Turkey have joined the Axis.
Oh.
2 German cities have been nuked. And an intense war is waged over the English Channel and Middle East.
Okay, so right now we're talking about an August 1945 where Germany is very clearly the victor.
With no peace treaty or neutrality acts holding them down, the Americans and British prepare to unleash all their meticulously crafted toys. Just 4 months after the death of Roosevelt, Truman kicked off his presidency by pressing the big red button.
Okay, so...
But the follow-up had been planned since 1941. The war
4 years earlier, so I'm assuming this scenario is that Germany gets a nuke, right? I mean, dang, I'm going to have to remember all the little details of Oppenheimer to figure out exactly how they could have done that. I watched that movie a while ago.
Pearl Harbor. But apart from covert operations, the Allies could do little more but stand by as Germany engulfed
Just dominated
the Soviet Union. This came at a
That's
great
scary.
cost. But it also created a vast disparity in experience.
I mean, it was just insane that the USA and the Brits, in a way, were able to help support the Soviets because the Soviets were so isolated over there. Remember, I mean, they were pretty much by themselves, smashed in between, well, obviously the Germans that were invading, but also the Japanese. There wasn't much going on over there, but they were kind of in like an island by themselves. So that was obviously the big fear that the Allies had.
Mustache Man. What's the point of this, YouTube? Why do you keep demonetizing these videos despite me avoiding saying his name? I even made sure to have that particular Hindu symbol covered up, and it didn't matter. Nukes in Korea? Fine. Calling out Stalin and blowing up Chernobyl? A-okay. But talking about the most famous war in history? Now that's too far. Rant aside, I'm gonna make...
It's unfortunate, too, because certain channels get hit harder than others when it comes to this subject.
Bonus content exclusively for my Patreon and YouTube members. So hey, check that out. Anyway, Mustache Man. God, I hate saying that.
Mustache Man, Austrian painter. How many other ones did we have? Failed painter, Austrian guy. I don't think... I'm running out of ideas.
Had been in power since 1933. And with the win over the Soviets in 1944... he spent a year prepping for this encounter. In our timeline, World War II can be seen as one big conflict, with a prologue in Ethiopia, China, and Spain.
Yes.
But in this alternate timeline, the big war is split into 3 distinct phases.
Like the Emperor Tiger Star reference right here. That's very cool. Okay, so Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I do think that World War II has a very interesting, very gray start time. It's kind of a complicated issue talking about exactly when World War II started. Some people say it's not until 1941 when the U.S. officially joins in because that brings it more of a world war, but, you know, the British Empire had Canada, so I don't really know how it works.
Germany taking over Poland, Denmark, Norway, and France, ending with the peace treaty with Britain in 1940, Germany attacking the Soviets while Japan bombs Pearl Harbor a year later, and lastly, May 1945. A well-organized German Wehrmacht,
look at those
Luftwaffe,
graphics,
and Kriegsmarine attempt to crush the British Empire. With Britain phased out of the war until that point, it makes no sense to declare war on America until 1945, and when Mustache Man does, it blows up in his face. Or should I say, it blows up in Cologne and Hamburg. Ouch.
Oh boy.
In our world...
I was literally... This is such a perfect video for me to watch this because I was literally just talking about earlier in like a history meme review video what I think the Americans would do if they got the nuke and Germany was still around. Would they nuke? What cities would they nuke in Germany? And would Germany even care? Were they psycho enough? Well, especially if they had basically beaten the Soviet Union out in the East, I don't know if they would care that like multiple cities... They would care, but... I think they'd probably keep going.
Goebbels used the bombing of Dresden to launch a propaganda campaign aimed at revoking the Geneva Conventions and spurring on new recruits. Rather than seeing that happen in the closing chapters of the war, here we see that at its very onset. Germany's own Pearl Harbor. Something so horrific, it's seared into the public consciousness. And now, it was time for Germany to unveil its own super weapon.
The disastrous opening moves of the Allies.
Until this point,
how did we get here?
intentionally left out Iceland from the picture for the sake of pacing. But if you're one of my 21,000 viewers from Iceland, first off, hi. Second, strap in, because this is your first and only mention. Just like the dual invasion of Iran by the British and the Soviets in 1941, the Russian invasion of Iceland in 1940 tends to be swept under the rug.
Yes, I like to talk about it, but it is often kind of, I think that's the perfect way to put it, swept under the rug. The British just took them over. I'm wondering if in this alternative history scenario, does the British's worst fear happen? Because remember, the Germans just took over. They rolled over Denmark. They took over Norway. Do they finally get to that invasion of Iceland? I think actually this scenario might be talking like a couple years after that whole fact.
Essentially, in order to prevent it from falling into German hands, the British sent in some Marines and occupied Iceland for the duration of the war.
And Iceland was kind of like, what are you going to do?
Germany considered going there themselves, but calculated that the cost of maintaining the island would outweigh the benefits. In this alternate timeline, this would unfold the exact same way, only 5 years later. So far, so good. Iceland is denied. Now for the other big base of operations, one that could cut Britain out of its empire. A small chain of Portuguese islands, strategically located just 1,500 miles away from Boston, beating out how close Hawaii was to California by 900 miles.
Wow.
A fun fact which both Roosevelt and Dan B067 were both well aware of. The famous...
I'm thinking of also another British island, Bermuda. I think that would be a cool jumping off points for the Germans, maybe.
War Plan Grey from our timeline.
Maybe they didn't want to get lost.
Never had to be put into place, since Portugal never ended up leasing its...
They might get stuck in a triangle somewhere. So I think it's important to note that in this scenario, there's some background context, I believe, because AlternateHistoryHub has talked, and I actually completely agree with him on that other video. He talked about how the only way Germany could have won in Europe is if they just absolutely obliterated the Allies at the time, which was the French and the British at Dunkirk. If the Dunkirk, quote unquote retreat wasn't done successfully across the English Channel, and like 250,000 British troops got captured in that single moment, well then, yeah, that probably would have got the Brits to a peace deal. But let's see if that's what he's talking about.
Bases to the Germans. By having joined the Axis in 1943, this scenario gives the Germans 2 full years to pack these islands full of U-boat wolf packs and heavy fortifications. July 1945. Days before the Trinity test.
Ooh.
And 2 months since the Azores were used to sink countless convoys full of men and equipment.
I'm really liking these graphics. These are looking pretty cool. I wonder what he's working with now. I haven't seen AlternateHistoryHub use stuff like this before.
Coming in from the Commonwealth. Truman and Churchill prepare an armada to take out the Wolf Den. The cracked Enigma codes outlined the numbers and positions of the enemy vessels, but nothing could prepare the Allies for what came next. HMS Hood, HMS Queen Elizabeth, HMS Warspite, HMS Indomitable, all escorted by cruisers and destroyers, sailed side by side with the American Navy. Truman sent in the battleships USS Texas and her sister USS New York, as well as
that
USS
would be absolutely
Arkansas.
insane. It's kind of no, I don't want to say it like that. That sounds a little crazy, but I was gonna say it's kind of sad that we didn't get to do something like this. I mean, the only reason why we would see British and Navy, American ships kind of moving in a formation together is if, well, I guess the Germans were taking over all of Europe, but dang, this would have been really epic. Like, man, all right.
Colorado and the new USS Iowa.
I don't want to root for
Alongside them
this,
were the
but
aircraft carriers USS Ranger and USS Yorktown.
These graphics are incredible.
A formidable armada. After all, with the Mediterranean in Axis hands.
So, I mean, let's see exactly what is going on here. Obviously, well, it's pretty much pretty similar to what we are expecting. There's a controlled France. Benito Mussolini's kind of doing his thing. It doesn't look like the Allies have gotten to Africa just yet.
This was the only corridor from which Anzac forces could arrive. But this Germany, 1945 Germany, with all of the oil and metal it could wish for, without a disrupted economy and a vast amount of naval ports, manages to produce cutting-edge equipment and vehicles.
Finland is still on the Axis side.
Type 21 Electro U-boat,
Ooh.
the first true modern submarine. The template used by the Americans, British, and Soviets for all future subs.
Wow.
Germany had many of these crazy projects, which either failed to materialize due to, lack of materials, or...
That's one thing for sure. Never underestimate the crazy projects the Germans had under their belts. I mean, they were doing some wild stuff. I mean, obviously, you don't have to go very far into some conspiracy rabbit holes to figure out some of the crazier things that they were doing. And honestly, they're not even conspiracy. I mean, they were really doing a lot of wild stuff.
Managed to produce only
it's proven
of them. The Electro boat was in the latter category since it came to life in 1944. But here, in this alternate timeline, the Azores have dozens of them. Its design minimized the acoustic signature, making it harder for sonar to pick up on its location when submerged. The Allied Armada would succeed in bombing the hell out of the many island bases, but at the cost of losing nearly every ship, as well as thousands of sailors. Fighter pilots would see their aircraft carriers sink to the bottom of the Atlantic with nowhere to land.
I'm assuming Japan is still around here in 1945, or I need to know the context. That'd be very interesting if the U.S. was forced to split their navy. If they were supposed to, obviously in our timeline, they had more focus. They were able to focus a bit more on the Japanese. But if they were to take some of that Pacific fleet and have to divert them away to the Atlantic Ocean to deal with a very big, aggressive Germany, that would allow Japan to thrive maybe a little bit more.
Of course, is one
depends on the situation.
Would never forget. From that point on, naval traffic is rerouted to go from the Indian Ocean to the Caribbean, before eventually hoping to make it past the wolf packs and into Britain.
Okay, well there you go. The British Isles barely hold on.
This scenario isn't just speculation for the sake of speculation. It's really just expanding on plans that were in place from both sides. Things like Operation Barbarossa, the Middle Eastern Campaign, the Manhattan Project, experimental designs, and War Plan Grey.
I can't tell you, anyone that's in the alt history community knows about all the crazy other alternative. Here's the thing, nations will always think of a plan for everything. There's plans for literally everything you can think of. I'm thinking of the Canadian plan of what if the U.S. Invaded them, or vice versa. There's all these different maps that are drawn up. I can tell you right now, the Brits, the Americans, the Soviets, the Germans, they had plans for every possible situation. Maybe not every possible situation. I don't know about if aliens came down. I wouldn't be surprised though. Don't put it past them to have some sort of alien backup plan.
This next chapter isn't any different. On January 27th, 1939, Mustache Man orders Plan Z into action. The rearmament and expansion of the Kriegsmarine by 1948. This project is given the highest industrial priority. Interestingly enough, we know what would have been ordered: 4 aircraft carriers, 68 destroyers, and 10 battleships.
I love how many documents we were able to recover after World War II. It's incredible. It's funny to know so many things about, if this happened, then we know the Germans would have responded with, this. In this case, I guess 4 aircraft carriers. 68, is that cruisers?
In our timeline, this was scrapped in less than a year due to oil.
Yeah,
but
they
thanks
already
to
knew.
Romania and the Caucasus in this scenario, that's no longer an issue. With the help of Baltic bases, an infinite Swedish metal cheat, and German engineering, the Royal Navy now has a run for its money. A few of you pointed out that 5 more years was just not enough time for Germany to build a legit navy, and I get that. But consider this. In 1933...
It'd be fascinating to know, or just to see a scenario where Germany did actually have one of the best navies in the world. Obviously that's the biggest threat. I think back to a time in World War I, Germany kind of building up their navy before the big conflict actually broke out. That's the one thing that will absolutely trigger the British, because their entire integrity, their nation's integrity, their sovereignty relies on having basically the strongest navy on Earth. Well, that's how it used to be. So to finally see the Germans have something where they could compete with the British, even compete with the British and the Americans combined, it's hard to think of, especially considering like I see so many memes about how the Japanese and maybe even the Italians had a better navy than the Germans, depending on the time period, depending on the year, of course.
Post-Versailles Germany had an army of 100,000 troops and no air force to speak of. Then look what happened. An alternate buildup of its navy wouldn't be impossible. It just wasn't the main priority in our timeline. With the first conflict settled, Germany now has time to fully focus on countering the British. So in 1945, the two meet in the North Sea. Rather than having one side rush things while the other just plays a strategic long game, there's now a state of panic and urgency all around.
Oh, he's clearly, oh man, I think the mustache man clearly on his old stuff again, the same stuff that he was on during the Berlin Olympics. His eyes are like freaking out.
Truman and Churchill have
my eyes freak out like that too sometimes, not gonna lie.
Mustache Man kinda waits too long to play with his new toy. Speaking of which, it should be mentioned that by 1945,
here it is.
The Führer's health was not the best.
Yeah.
He did have mood swings.
Yo, this is the exact footage I was talking about. That's crazy. This is okay. Well, I guess we're thinking alike. That's good.
Amplified by his prescribed use of certain drugs.
It had been like 10 years or more of him doing this stuff. Like, I honestly, well, here's the thing. Like, Stalin survives till like 1953 or something like that. I don't think Adolf survives much longer than that. I would give 1953, 1955 at best. I mean, he was out here just destroying his body, basically. I mean, having a good time doing it, I'm sure, but
that doesn't mean he would have driven the nation off a cliff with reckless decisions. This idea that Mustache Man was the one who made all the bad tactical calls really just came from him overruling decisions in the later stage of the Eastern Front.
Yeah, I think, and honestly, when he's in when he's in the bunker, when he sees clearly what's about to happen, okay, the man's gonna make some pretty bad decisions. But when he's at his peak, you know, which he is in this scenario in 1945, like, he's probably gonna feel a little bit less pressure. Obviously, his life isn't directly on the line anymore, so I don't think he would make as big of mistakes. But yeah, that is a theory that he made a lot of mistakes because of all the no substances he was doing. But
and also the Desert Fox having really good PR. A naval conflict against the British in the North Sea isn't a bad idea. It's a necessity for Germany's war effort. Now, whether they would win is another question. This alternate North Sea clash is the largest naval battle in history.
And this is the thing, like, if the Germans can wipe out probably just the British Navy, if they can, or not even wipe out, but just take out 25 to 50% of their fleet, well, now they don't have to worry quite as much of the D-Day invasion, because the Germans knew a D-Day invasion was gonna occur. Have you seen all the beaches that they lined up with like fortifications? I can't remember what it was called, but they lined up fortified beaches from, like, you know, obviously German occupied France all the way up there to Norway. They knew there was a possibility of a D-Day was likely. They didn't know where it was going to be, but that was likely. If they bust open, destroy the British fleet, well then bam, they have significantly less to worry about.
By the end, the Atlantic is littered with a lot of scrap. To soften Britain up, the Kriegsmarine launches armadas from
That's a great way to phrase it, soften Britain up.
Attempting to fish out the Allies. Even with its alternate massive buff and fulfilling its naval buildup, the Kriegsmarine is still outnumbered 5-1. Additionally, unlike the Allied intelligence systems where different agencies fed their data to a centralized one, the German intelligence apparatus was divided into 3 parts:
Interesting.
Army, Navy, and Air Force. In our timeline, all received hints that the Enigma was broken, but apart from knowing that it would cost their heads, they were never able to share notes, as the intel was segregated. Karl Donitz in our timeline pretty much knew that the code was broken, but he had no way to prove his suspicions. On top of that, the American...
Are we going to reference Alan Turing? Or was this a different dude in this alternative history? I'm pretty sure it was still him, but...
aircraft technology was just out of this world. We're talking P-51 Mustangs, Lockheed P-80s, prototype F-86 Sabres,
This is random, but these graphics remind me of like this old Spider-Man animated TV show from like 20 years ago. It's pretty crazy.
And Corsairs, all produced in massive quantities. This isn't just a one-sided battle, however. What they lacked in technology, the Luftwaffe made up for in experience. By this time in this alternate war, they had flown over Poland, France, Greece, and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Hundreds of operations, creating thousands of experienced fighters. Despite their tech advantage, for those first crucial months, the Allies would be playing catch-up. Now, it's not like the Axis had no advantage. There was one revolutionary weapon that barely got any playtime in our World War II. I'm talking about the Fritz X, also known as the world's first guided bomb. This was specifically designed to deal with ships. In our timeline, a 3,000-pounder was first used in 1943, and it nearly derailed the Allied invasion of Italy. Both the British and Americans had radio-guided bombs and missiles in 1944, but the Fritz was on a whole other level. What this means is that the Brits not only had to defend against...
That's the thing, because the German scientists were doing so much research about, like, crazy... Remember that in our timeline, when we both, you know, the Soviets and the Americans, or the Allied forces in the West, invade Germany, we take all these documents, we take their scientists, we start learning, like, dang, these dudes are doing some crazy stuff. We're going to want some of this information. We're going to want them on our side, and that's basically how we came up with NASA. But
against a storm of
you let Germany keep going down those rabbit holes, and oh man, they're gonna. Well, we know what they would have figured out. That's also very interesting. Is we have documentation of more than likely what they would have figured out in 1945, or you know whatever, very soon after that.
Coming from France, but Spitfires and Mustangs also have to patrol the North Sea too. Now, the Allies were more than capable of sustaining the inevitable losses thanks to the American industry. But due to the Azores and Canary Islands, Truman has to take bold risks. In our timeline, the peak of U-boat activity caused a 6% interception of all convoys. Here, perhaps we see that rate go up to 10 or even 15%, just due to increased quantity and quality of submarines. So many ships and supplies...
And this would completely break America's support for Britain, which, you know, would leave them... pardon the pun, on an island.
To mention countless lives,
literally,
are lost in a desperate Hail Mary to save the last resistance in Europe. Germany might even have the advantage. But then comes August 1945, when the sun rose over Germany, signifying the dawn of the atomic age. It's morning.
Okay, so
in
here
Hamburg
we go.
And Cologne.
This is where things are going to get pretty interesting. Like I said, would the Americans, I'm just curious where the Americans would bomb in this situation. I was literally just having this thought experiment like last week. Like they probably wouldn't blast a new sun over Berlin, but who knows? Maybe if they got really desperate. Do they also only have 3 nukes? Let's go ahead and see, because the Americans only were able to get 3 apparently, for the Japanese only dropping 2 though.
The second and
Cologne.
4th largest German cities. The war is all the talk on radio and newspapers, but on the ground, it's all just that. News. This is all about to change.
Ground news.
In a sudden flash, the city center ignites.
That's
Thousands
crazy.
look away from the blinding light. Most are engulfed in fire. In a matter of seconds, buildings are blasted from their foundation. A fireball soars into the air.
This is fascinating because, yeah, I don't see Germany giving up after this. Even if they lose 3 cities, they just look too good. Like they have so much. They have all of Europe. They're not going to give up. If anything, this experience might give them more information on basically what they need to come up with themselves.
Before morphing into a distinct mushroom. It's a scene that's repeated twice in Germany. Now, this is something to certainly speculate. 2 cities being wiped off the map in the middle of a war, and not at the end. Now, the actual consequences...
It's fascinating to think about. Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's also a lot of debate. I'm interested. It's interesting that AlternateHistoryHub chose Cologne and Hamburg. I mean, with the Japanese... Also, does this mean the Japanese get spared? I don't even know what's going on in Asia, but they tried to do more military targets. Of course, there was plenty of civilians that still got taken out, but and they did avoid Tokyo for its there's evidence that shows they didn't want to hit Tokyo for the historical factor of that, but it's dang. I mean, what do you really go after? Also, you don't really want to hit a port city out here. I mean, you might as well use your nuke to the full extent. Maybe something deeper in. I don't know.
Cities being wiped off the map in the middle of a war and not at the end. Now, the actual consequences of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still being debated to this day. But one major reason for that is because the bombings were at the end of the war. Was it the Soviets invading Manchuria?
Yes.
Or was it the nukes? Doesn't matter. War's over anyway.
Yeah, and that's a huge controversy if the U.S. even needed to drop the nukes in the first place. I mean, it's hard to say, but in this situation, with a big, powerful Germany still in 1945, I don't think anyone would bat an eye, honestly. I think there wouldn't be, even if the Allies still somehow ended up coming out on top, I think that most of the world would be like, well, yeah, they were about to win. Everyone that knows the German atrocities, I think, would kind of understand that behavior right there.
Yet in this alternate timeline, these important German cities are nuked while Germany is still at full strength.
It's very
honestly
fascinating.
Even stronger than in our timeline.
Yeah.
And yet, that strength could do nothing against an actual nuclear attack.
Crazy.
That has to be impactful.
Yeah.
More impactful than it was with Japan. For one, by the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, Japan had already been subjected to fire bombings.
Yeah.
The nukes were
and those were arguably worse, so it's, it just kind of depends on the
sudden
situation.
And horrific in other ways, but the Japanese populace had faced months of bombings by that point. In this alternate timeline, these bombings would be truly out of the blue. It'd be something that would shock the German populace, which in this scenario had not seen any repercussions of the war abroad. And then, without warning, that happens. Frankly, while this does destroy 2 enemy cities...
I mean, the thing is, though, we referenced how Japan was used to being, firebombed. Well, Germany was, but in our timeline, and I'm not sure what's going on in this timeline, so depends.
This would be a propaganda goldmine for Germany.
Oh,
even in our
true.
timeline, the bombings of Dresden were decried by the Nazi government as a crime, going too far. Avenging Dresden was pushed by Goebbels for the last few months of the war, and that was by 1945, so it didn't matter that much. In this alternate scenario, we're talking about 2 cities getting wiped off the map.
Dang. Yeah, these are some pretty crazy numbers, that's for sure.
As the war's just getting started.
I don't know why this is just giving me a scenario. Okay, obviously we're in the middle of World War II, and there's lots of other things that are going on, a lot of bigger things that are going on. But is anyone imagining, what would a German Godzilla movie be like? That'd be crazy. Because if Japan doesn't get nuked, we don't get Godzilla. And in this scenario, I think Germany ends up maybe making a German Godzilla. I want to know what that would be like.
With a death toll that would be in the hundreds of thousands, undisputed. Yes. And all for what was essentially going to be seen by the Germans as a sneak attack. A cowardly move by an inferior enemy who resorted to science instead of strength.
I could see that.
I can already imagine how this would play.
Yeah.
If nukes had been dropped on any country that wasn't already bombed back to the Stone Age, or trapped on an island, or already lost, there would be an immense outrage by the people.
That's a very, very good point. They would literally accidentally create German zombies. They're rage zombies, not real life zombies. I could see the German people being more motivated than ever before, especially if we're only dropping 2. 2 would not be enough.
Something that might have real ramifications, despite causing some disruption to the...
I really like this take. That is a new take that I haven't seen before. Because, okay, I gotta admit, I'm really tired of all the memes of what if Germany won World War? And then they put a dash, and then they were they put Berlin, and then there's a mushroom cloud, and it's Berlin if Germany lasted a day or 2 longer than it did or whatever. This provides some extra context of maybe what could have happened. Okay, yeah, Germany maybe did get nuked. That doesn't mean they would give up, and if anything, maybe it would have made the German people even more upset.
The Reich's
and ready to get revenge.
This bombing is really the German Pearl Harbor, despite them being the ones who technically started the war.
they won't know about that. They'll forget. And that was like way 6 years ago. It's 1945. No one's gonna remember.
But that was the past war.
There you go.
That doesn't really count.
There you go.
This is a new one.
There it is.
And the Americans went too far. What I'm getting at here is that things get really ugly. More ugly than they did in our timeline.
Yeah.
I could very easily imagine reprisals against many assorted groups.
Why is that guy Bulgarian? Oh, there's all sorts of different flags there. Okay, I see.
Throughout Europe. If I say anything else, this video is going to get demonetized.
Yeah, let's not.
For many people in occupied territories and prisoners of war captured in the Middle East, the nuke is essentially spraying a wolf with pepper spray while you're still in the cage with the wolf.
That is a good thing. I also like that the mustache man's eye is still twitching out.
Sure, it can't get out of the cage, but it can vent its frustration on you. Also, the wolf now wants to obliterate London. The Allies have, or should I say had, 2 nukes, but the Germans have the V3 supergun.
Oh, there it is. Okay, and we got the V3. Oh, okay, not even the V2.
Also known as the weapon you'd see in Red Alert. In our time, it nearly became operational. I say nearly because the Allies bombed the living hell out of the facility while it was being built. 17 times in less than a year. Usually
Crazy.
with over 100 bombers at a time.
Dang.
They really wanted this thing dead. So what was this super weapon? A huge underground system was built, where several of these long-range artillery guns were permanently fixed on London. Near Calais, this gun could fire 5,000-pound explosive shells traveling at around 5,000 feet per second, and capable of hitting London with deadly accuracy.
That's insane.
He used a method called supercharging, where multiple chambers fed into the massive barrel. As for the V, similarly to the rockets, it stood for vengeance, with its sole purpose being to terrorize the British population.
Giving me Batman vibes. Why am I thinking of Germany as Batman here?
Speaking of rockets, Werner von Braun wasn't idle. Oh no, he was experimenting and perfecting his rockets against the Soviets. Thanks to this alternate increased resource pool, his ballistic missiles now can be bigger, faster, pointier, and above all else, more accurate. These weapons were going to be used anyway, but after the nukes, all bets are off. London had incredible air defenses, as well as the RAF, but it would be powerless against the V3 supergun. Even if most of its rounds missed, this weapon was far cheaper to use compared to a bombing run against a city, or the resources needed.
That's the thing. You hear all the time, like everyone loves to put, all the emphasis on nukes, but even today, we have so many other things that can also just completely obliterate a city. Maybe it's not just one bomb, it could be several, but we absolutely have multiple weapons and technologies and all sorts of things that can completely level a massive metropolitan area like this.
For V2 rockets, we're talking day in and day out, shells coming at Mach 4 speeds. Without question.
I mean, you don't even need to be that accurate. I mean, London's a pretty big city. Just launch it in there. It's going to hit something important, and just keep going. Keep going. Every single day, every single hour. All good.
To mass evacuations of the civilian population.
Dang, that's terrifying.
As well as the political heads of state. This means that Churchill and Parliament might need to head out towards
Plymouth?
Cornwall or even Yorkshire.
I was going to say, I wouldn't even come close anymore. I mean, because they'll just move it over to, like, Brittany, France or something like that. Well, I don't know if that may, or maybe here, but I'd probably want to move the capital up towards Scotland, to be honest.
To prevent the potential political crises that would come if a random shell would hit. The only way to prevent all of that is to ensure that the third nuke in production was meant for the fortress of Mimoyek, where the guns were stored. A hit delivered by a B-29 could end the threat, might destroy the guns, and prevent a mass panic which the fleeing of the Prime Minister would surely cause. When this happens, radiation levels spike close to Paris, and Uncle Sam is officially out of nukes for the entire year.
I'm getting a little confused because I had heard that there was 3 total nukes, and it would take 6 months to get more. This Alt History Hub here is saying there was 2, and it would take a full year. Maybe in this scenario, a full year, but it depends. Yeah, either way, there's going to be a wait, and this is ultimately just going to make Germany angry. I think that's the ultimate point here.
32 years after Einstein's theory of relativity, and just 7 years
What's wrong with his mustache right there? It looked like a little pinkish. Is that just the way
32 years after...
I don't know if he had some on his lips or something. What's going on there, Einstein? This is 1905?
Einstein's theory of relativity, and just 7 years after Chadwick discovered the neutron, it was German scientists who discovered nuclear fission. Many already speculated uranium ore to be a highly valuable resource, with Belgium even storing 1,250 tons of it.
Side note, but isn't it crazy, like, these insane technologies we figured out all the way back in almost 100 years ago now? Like, we were figuring out nuclear things in the 30s, obviously in the 40s as well, and a lot of that scientific advancement was all just to kill other people. But doesn't it make anyone else think, like, what are we researching right now under the surface that we have no idea about? Because it seems like there's like some dude in a lab that's constantly discovering the technology that we're all going to use like in 20 or 30 or 40 years. So what's going on right now in all those labs? I can't even imagine.
On Staten Island, the mine from which the ore came from was
Belgium.
Deep within the Belgian Congo.
Oh boy.
Where another 3,000 tons of it, then worthless ore, sat in storage facilities. In our timeline, after Belgium was occupied, its colonies continued to aid the Allies, selling uranium at a ludicrously high cost.
Whoa.
But in this alternate scenario, Germany gets a free hand in
like that they're surrounded. Look at those German soldiers get probably malaria or something
over the colony, following a peace deal with Britain in 1940. No doubt most of those 3,000 tons still make their way to New York, as it would have taken a couple of years for Germany to actually establish control. But considering they purchased 60 tons of the ore in 1940, it's safe to assume they would stockpile it. That means that from 1941 onwards, the Manhattan Project could not rely on the Congo for its uranium enrichment program.
Dang.
The first 4 nukes, including the one
Ooh, are these accurate names? Gadget, Little Boy, Fat Man, Mark III.
Used in Trinity, still get made thanks to the Belgian stockpiles, and the Congo mine would be acquired within a month after the war began. But it took months.
Oh, so they did nuke, they nuked 2 cities and then the V3 rocket? Is that what happened?
Several months for the enrichment process. Canada, Colorado, and Utah did possess minor uranium deposits, but nothing in the world came close to that Congo quality. Even with an infinite
Didn't we find
amount
a bunch in Australia? Australia has a bunch of like rare earth metals and things like that, but I think they have uranium.
of financing from the U.S.
But they probably
government.
did not find it.
America would be able to arm
Population
no
density is too
more
low down
than
there.
1 nuke every 2 months, starting in 1946.
Whoa.
But until then, a lot happens in another crucial theater.
Operation Desert Storm Part 2. The Middle
Okay,
East.
so once again, on paper, what should be a relatively easy front for the Allies turns ugly in a hurry. Sure, the British have the Universal Centurion tanks alongside the A-34 Comet, both developed in late 1944, while Uncle Sam boasted upgraded EZ-8 versions of the M4 Sherman, as well as the M26 Pershing. Thanks to that earlier Iran-Iraq proxy war, the Allies loaded Iraq with a ton of hardware. Then there's Saudi Arabia, which just stumbled upon its first oil well in 1938.
Oh my goodness.
By 1944, regardless of the timeline, America builds a formidable airbase at Duran, a base close to said oil well. This gives rise to the Arabian-American oil company, Aramco. Today, it controls 259 billion barrels worth of oil and gas reserves.
Yeah.
Unmatched by any other company globally. So, with no U-boats in proximity, tons of air...
It's crazy to think, like, this was the moment where a country that, you know, didn't really have a whole lot going on, just became so powerful, so rich and powerful. Saudi Arabia just overnight getting the most valuable resource.
Bases, high-tech tanks, fighters, and bombers, as well as a British-controlled India right next door. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything goes wrong. The equipment and organization of the Roman legion wasn't the reason the empire conquered most of Europe. As Caesar proved against other Roman legions, experience was a crucial component. The only theater
The Germans
where
had
the
that.
Wehrmacht could flex its muscle was its campaign against Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Iran. Led by the Desert Fox himself, Rommel had a higher quality and quantity of troops and tanks, hardened by General Winter and fueled by the Caucasus, allowing him to rampage through the Fertile Crescent. In our timeline, the US suffered multiple failures as it tried to get its inexperienced soldiers and officer corps to adapt from its outdated strategies in North Africa. Early commanders like General Lloyd Fredendall were criticized for being indecisive and disconnected from frontline realities. This led to their replacement by more capable leaders like General George S. Patton. But all that took time which they had due to facing off against Italians and the Germans being distracted by the Soviets.
But in this
Here,
scenario,
not only are those issues compounded, but you've got a President Truman eager for results. Additionally, you have a Winston Churchill who, well, I'll just let Teddy say it.
And let's face it, you're not all that great. You tossed away lives in Gallipoli like they were scraps off your plate.
Especially if those were Indian lives. Iraq
that's it's good comment there. Yeah, Churchill's got quite the mixed past, that's for sure.
Despite the locals initially assisting the Axis against British rule, they would probably soon learn what the Ukrainians did earlier and regret their choice. By the end of 1946, Allied control might be limited to the Gulf area, with Mosul, Baghdad, Tabriz, and Tehran liberated by the Axis.
Side note, I love this is like a realistic look at, I'm liking that all the small little details of how Germany could have been obviously beginning to come out on top here in World War II. It wasn't just like Germany invades the British Isles and then bam, knocks Britain out of the war, and then I don't know, some sort of magical things are going to have to happen for the Germans to actually make it to the USA. Like, this was a fun take, looking at it detail by detail, like little smaller levels, which usually we don't see that often anymore in alt history scenarios, whether they're just like kind of maps online or other videos. So I really appreciated that.
Where they acquire even more oil wells. Keep in mind that while the Axis suffered huge casualties, the German, Spanish, Italian, Romanian,
so Spain
and
is
Turkish
on the Axis
forces
side.
Don't fare much better. Lines are drawn around Isfahan and Basra as both sides prepare for a grueling war of attrition. Over the Mediterranean, things are just as bleak. The Axis blitzkrieg rolls through Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, despite fierce resistance from the Allies.
Are they going to steal the oil from Saudi Arabia now? Oh, man, yeah. So, I mean, I think, so in this scenario, they have, like, just an abundant amount of resources. They just get every resource imaginable, and now they're going for this part of the world, which I think is going to be, I mean, it's like Dunzo.
Bombers flatten Cairo, with a very high chance that a random bomb hits the pyramids. While Jerusalem
we finally get to see that.
Dust.
Not that we want to see that. I'm just saying the Napoleon trailer movie made us think that a cannonball was going to hit the pyramid, but
by the end of 1946, the nuclear arsenal is dry. A battered Britain barely stands. The Atlantic is crawling with U-boats, and all seems lost. But this is where we kiss the dreams of a decisive Axis win goodbye. Because even in this timeline, there's still hope at the end of the tunnel for the Allies. But that's for another time. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
Yes, I do think that, because at the end of the day, the Germans are doing fantastic, but I haven't heard anything that has weakened the USA. The Soviets are still doing fine. At the end of the day, even if the Germans knock out the Brits in this scenario, like I still feel like the U.S. is going to be a problem. I don't know how you're going to do that insane invasion. I mean, our strongest asset, we have two oceans in between us, the Atlantic and the Pacific. I don't know how the Germans, even if they do have Iceland in this situation. So it's still interesting. The Brits, they're probably done though. But, I mean, that's fair to say. Oh, there we go. And by another time, I mean May, when the final chapter. Oh, nice. Okay, May will be the final chapter. Loving some of these comments. Video demonetized, budget tripled anyways. What if Zambia won the space race? What? That is something. I love how you gave World War II German bad guys the YouTube symbol as their. Yeah, that's Well, you know, don't forget the YouTube like full screen button used to be like an old German like Iron Cross. Yeah, it's not that way anymore, unfortunately. I liked that. I think one of the biggest things that I think about in a scenario where Germany, you know, I don't know, not necessarily decisively wins World War II, but they managed to stay around for like a couple of decades, are the eventual uprisings of the German people. In the 60s and 70s, there's a couple different, I can't remember, there's a couple different like Hoi4 alternative history mods that talk about this. It might be, it's funny that it probably is some of the bigger ones, but the uprisings that eventually occur in Europe when they're sick of the like authoritarian rule and the constant war, that would be an issue. Also, obviously, the inevitable Hitler death that will take place, like I said, maybe like the 50s. We were talking about all the fun little substances that he was doing, so he's probably not going to last long. So I feel like in the 60s and 70s, if you still have that like peace and love movement that occurs in the USA, that's eventually going to flood on over to the Germans as technology gets more and more, you know, colored television, national broadcast, radio, any of that stuff. The ideas are going to flood across the Atlantic, and there probably will be, just like, you know, in the way the Cold War and the Soviets decided to, you know, the Soviet people were eventually like, okay, we're done with this. We could see similar things. Maybe those things happen a little bit sooner. They're not quite as far away from the USA now, assuming that the Germans eventually end up controlling the British. But anyways, please go subscribe to Alternative History Hub. I'll see you later.
And big ol' thanks to my April patrons. I time traveled back in 2025 to stop Drew from taking over the world. We only have 2 years left. Drew's Argentinian Trust Fund, Rip Grandpa. Alexander the Terrible. Carmel S. Connor Pavlik. DOOCHBAGGINS. Fredrik Tibblin. KingBearHaze. KirinoIsBestGirl. LuxembourgLover. The Go. Nolan. NordTyrol. And Tambre.